Good evening, everyone from Semivsem. Things aren't going well in Ukraine, and honestly, it's the same everywhere. Today, for example, let's talk about why and for what reason Zelensky is telling everyone everywhere that there are no anti-aircraft missiles because, well, there just aren't any. It all looks very strange. Plus, there's also that situation in Lviv when the people of Lviv rebelled against the military enlistment officers. New details are coming to light there, plus looting, plus the killing of civilians by the military. Well, that's basically what's going on. And we'll talk a bit about Europe too. Let's go. Yes, please subscribe to the channel before we start. And look, Zelensky is once again starting to say that, you see, they weren't able to shoot down ballistic missiles. He's talking about the night strike on Kyiv, during which 11 people were injured. Residential buildings and offices in the capital were damaged, and oh my god. The theological seminary, the first hit on civilian infrastructure, happened even before the air raid alert was announced. Here it became clear how and why they managed to do it. The thing is, Russian troops moved their launchers closer to the border. Apparently that's how the military expert explained the flight time. And accordingly, the flight time to Kyiv was reduced to 3 minutes and no air raid alarm has time to go off. Air raid warning. At the same time, it turns out that Ukraine doesn't have the means to shoot down ballistic missiles. Earlier, they claimed they had nearly learned to shoot down hypersonic missiles. Soon they'll be gathering hazelnuts in baskets, and as a result, there are terrible damages. Well, you can see all of this in the pictures and videos.
And what else did the subtitles say?
Made by Dimitorzoc. They're eliminating the consequences of the shelling not only in Kyiv.
Subscribe to the Odessa channel, Dimitorzoc.
Kharkiv and Chernihiv regions. A total of more than 120 drones and 12 missiles were used. 6 of them were ballistic, and Zelensky says that support packages are needed agreed upon during the NATO meeting, plus licenses for Patriot and modern European missile defense projects. Honestly, I honestly don't really understand why. Zelensky keeps saying everywhere that there are no air defense systems but this basically leaves Kyiv exposed. So you can choose any target, strike it well, conveniently, without rushing, knowing that he doesn't have those very systems. Well, I don't know. It seems to me that this should be a military secret, right? If you don't have forces somewhere, or, on the contrary, you do have them somewhere, you probably need to keep that a secret. That's classified information. But even before they hit Kyiv with the ballistic missile, it was already clear we have a major air defense problem. So is this being done so that Kyiv gets bombed even more? And then you can be upset about the consequences, like look how many people died, right? That's nothing. We'll be taking missiles there for money, then under the same license we'll look for Patriots. Trump said a couple of words there like, we support the transfer of the license for the production of Patriots and ammunition, other supplies, but primarily ammunition in Ukraine. But today I read the news, Sean, and I started to wonder, and most likely this production will be located in some European countries. And despite the fact that in Ukraine they are already changing the legislation according to the European one, I believe that now everyone is already firmly in Europe with both feet and their backside is in Europe too. In general, everyone is in Europe, but not everything is so smooth. There are still a lot of legal complications. So, in terms of time, this will be stretched out a lot, but this is the first thing I would like to bring up to the surface from the bottom. The obvious question is why and for what purpose is this being done? The second thing is that very case. And the Lviv incident, when the draft officers, represented by some hired athletes and boxers, attacked civilians and then civilians got outraged, hundreds of people gathered there, and since there were as many territorial recruitment center staff as there were Ukrainians at the counter, they smashed up the van, tore it apart, there was a lot of that, and then they intimidated those who attacked those very territorial recruitment center staff. Declare them veterans there and veterans of the Battle of Kulikovo and Poltava and any other battles you want. And they took one of the people who were carrying out this resistance, let's put it that way, out to the forest, a sort of accidental organizer, you could say. This case is still ongoing. Pre-trial measures have already been imposed on 3 suspects, and then they found a few more. They can be held for up to 60 days, but what goes on behind the walls of these courts, of course, we don't know, but we can assume it's nothing good. We're talking about 2 men aged 21 and 28. The suspect himself, allegedly, and there's a third suspect here as well, who as you can see, provoked a conflict with a serviceman who actually isn't a serviceman at all, already. Well, we looked at the biography of this so-called artist, let's say a boxer from sports, who turned out not to be a serviceman at all. And none of his brothers, and it turns out he has two, serve in the army either. So the logical question arises, what's the problem then? To send them? You don't need to catch anyone on the streets, just take these thugs and send them to fight. I mean, they're physically fit citizens. But no, and then all sorts of people like Prytula start popping up, and blockheads, and who else hasn't shown up, to state their strong opinion about what's happening, to say that things with the military are already reaching the point of absurdity. They suggest giving these police officers and those TCC guys weapons so that they can use them in moments, let's say, when their safety is threatened, without regard for the rules of using weapons for any civil rights or anything else. Simply put, they would just shoot at the civilian population, whether this is a civil war or some other kind of war. Who is fighting whom is already strange. That same Prytula said that there is no division in Ukraine, that the people are united, but it turns out that's not the case. There does seem to be a division after all. Now, there are some kinds of castes, military, Titoshki, police, and civilians have fewer and fewer rights, and this makes you think about everything that's happening. And Budanov said there that that's it, you can't do certain things, it makes you think about everything that's happening, and Budanov said that you just can't do things, and that responsibility is needed, and that's it. Why civilians still have no rights is absolutely impossible to understand, but at the same time, these so-called veterans who attack the civilian population have a huge number of rights. In one of the videos and streams, I've already shared my thoughts on what will happen after the war. In short, nothing good will happen after the war ends. In short, nothing good. The hundreds of thousands of people who were at the front will return home. Many of them will want to act like they're above everyone else, meaning they will rush into politics, demand benefits, subsidies, some kind of increased rights and opportunities to stand out. On top of that, these people, just like it was in Russia, for example, after Afghanistan, after Chechnya, banditry, racketeering, and all the other wonderful manifestations of this semi-militarized society, which is what Ukraine is now. And these things are already starting to show up even before the war is over. When it will end is unclear. But already, for example, some fighters from the 155th Brigade, including their commander, are suspected of kidnapping people. The fighters were detained on suspicion of kidnapping 2 civilian men from the Kyiv region. Journalists reported the details of the case. From June 27th to 28th, 7 people... They entered the yard of 2 brothers in the Kyiv region and took them to an unknown place. Their whereabouts are unknown. No one gave any information to the journalists. It turned out that as many as 9 brigade fighters were involved in the abduction of people. It turned out that most likely these 2 people somehow insulted the wife of this very brigade commander who has run off somewhere. Well, an investigation has now begun. And now they're talking not only about abduction, but also about murder. According to the information, this was due to a domestic conflict, not a military one, obviously. Soon they might start saying that the soldiers were insulted, this and that. And the atmosphere there was so intense that people said those who were killed deserved it. But in reality, this is a terrible incident. So the bodies have already been exhumed, they've been found, and this is far from the first scandal connected with the 155th Brigade. In 2025, there was an additional inspection that uncovered a scheme involving combat pay. Well, that's how it all stayed. No one could move this mess being pulled in different directions like the swan, pike, and crab, so nothing changes. Most likely this isn't the only brigade like that, it's everywhere. So, if during this time they're kidnapping civilians with impunity, people who aren't even enemies of the Ukrainian authorities, just over some everyday conflict, then what will happen after the war when these people have free time? They won't need to defend themselves anymore. They won't need to defend Ukraine and fight anymore, and they'll be able to do whatever they want. And obviously this whatever they want is very different from what ordinary people want who wish for peace, not all of this. To kill someone for an insult, I think that only happened in some primitive societies, or maybe back in the 90s when those gangsters were around and all that. If you looked at someone the wrong way, well, that's it. And now it's worse than the 90s because back then there was at least some hope for the future and it was actually coming true. People were gradually living better and better, but now hope, what kind of hope is there? Things are bad in Europe. Before, at least if you made it to Europe, everything was great for you. Now, things aren't so good in Europe, and in the US, it's also unclear what's going on. No matter which country you look at, something unclear is happening everywhere, and for the ordinary citizen, it's not very good. So there isn't much hope that somewhere there will be a ray of light in this kingdom of darkness and anger. That's just how it is. On top of everything, looting is on the rise. For example, if a warehouse gets bombed, some teenagers are already gathering at the Philip Morris warehouse to steal cigarettes and some sticks. Honestly, I don't know what that is, but maybe someone does. I think those who smoke probably know. So there are a huge amount of merchandise just sitting out in the open, and teenagers are walking around and looking, and not just them. Philip Morris has already said this is fake. None of this is true. Everything is under round-the-clock security. But we know that if someone says something is fake after it's already been mentioned and almost proven, then most likely that's exactly how it was. Probably Philip Morris doesn't want to ruin their reputation with something like this. You can see there's already water in those warehouses, so their reputation is already, let's say, a bit tarnished. And they don't want to damage their reputation even more. So nothing good about that either. And as for Europe, I also mentioned that most likely they will no longer provide assistance to draft-eligible men from Ukraine who are seeking asylum. And leading the way is beautiful Estonia. This is one of the heads of the 3 Baltic states, which always declares that they are ready to fight, that they will allocate $3,000 to NATO, and then NATO will thrive. So their statements don't really correlate with their military, economic, or any other capabilities. I have absolutely nothing against these 3 countries, but their statements about their aggressiveness are kind of strange. So what are they doing now? They want to send draft-eligible Ukrainian men back to Ukraine so that they, fight, supposedly defending Europe, and they call it ensuring Europe's security, which you'd think Ukrainian conscripted men couldn't care less about. So, until March 4, 2028, temporary protection for Ukrainian refugees in Estonia has been extended, but it will no longer be granted to draft-eligible men who are applying for it for the first time. Estonian Minister of Internal Affairs Igor Taro stated that they will continue to support Ukraine and its people, who have suffered from Russian aggression, as well as the unified approach of the European Union in providing them with assistance. According to him, many Ukrainians are still unable to return home. But the extension of temporary protection gives people who have fled the war confidence that they can safely organize their lives, until there is an opportunity to return to Ukraine without fear of the threat of war. But in the future, it seems that men have fewer rights than everyone else, so that's how it turned out, not as we had hoped. The rule applies, I emphasize, to new asylum seekers, not to those from before. Those who received it earlier will be provided for under the current conditions. As they say, first come, first served. And this very minister emphasized that the countries of the European Union should already start preparing for the gradual end of the temporary protection program after the war is over. According to him, the states should develop mechanisms that allow Ukrainians either to switch to other legal grounds for staying in Europe or to safely return home. As for temporary protection, it is worth remembering that it gives Ukrainian refugees the right to live, work, study, and receive necessary social and medical services. Currently, about 4.5 million people have received it in Europe. Merz, and here suddenly this very popular politician who has either 13 or already 7% support in Germany. And Merz stated that the decision to end the war in Ukraine is up to Moscow. Honestly, I don't know why you'd make such strong statements. I mean, you came out, energy is being spent, the journalists who came to this event are spending their work time on it. Security is working there, the meeting is being organized. And you say something like, water is wet and if you dry the water it will be dry, or snow is cold and you can make a snowman out of snow, and if you hit the snowman it might fall apart. Well, I mean, their sayings are kind of strange. Merz recalled that on Germany's initiative, the alliance member countries in Ankara agreed on a new military aid package worth as much as $140 billion. Obviously, none of the countries need anything European. Everything is fine, there's no need, no aid, nothing. That's why everything is going as it should. More and more money is being allocated. Well, and to really drive this point home, I mean to further improve the quality of life for European citizens, the European Parliament voted for control over private correspondence. The European Parliament supported the idea of allowing messaging app owners to scan private correspondence in order to combat sexual violence against children on the internet. An exception is made for encrypted chats. Of course, it sounds great, but in reality, all of this is being done so that we, dear viewers, can be controlled more and more. Because this nonsense has nothing to do with violence. Simply because the perpetrator himself, if he wants to, will find any way to get to his victim, so to speak. And this is done so that, first of all, you register with your passport. And by the way, in European countries, they've already introduced this and it's already in place. Passport only. Internal documents. Secondly, the authorities could monitor what you write so that, God forbid, you don't write anything against this government. But here, apparently, they've taken the best from Ukraine, Russia, and other countries where there is control over all this and where people are punished for it. So soon everything will be like this. Country and a smartphone, just like in Ukraine, this digital concentration camp. Well, pretty much the same thing is happening now. Meta, Microsoft, Google, and other companies are telling us that soon they may get the right to scan private chats to detect evidence of sexual abuse. And on July 9th, the European Parliament voted for a temporary exemption from EU data protection rules for all this, but at the same time demanded a number of amendments. So, end-to-end encrypted chats are not excluded, but I think there will soon be another amendment and end-to-end encryption will be banned because it gets in the way, for those who need to dig where they need to. And that's exactly not our business, you and me, to know where they need to dig. And in order for messaging apps to be able to tell on us by detecting all sorts of stuff, they need to get permission to deviate from strict rules. Such a practice existed before, but in April the exception expired, and the the EP actually considered chat control under an accelerated procedure. Naturally, everything worked out, no one was against it, everything is just great, everything is just fine, everything is just fine. Прекрасная маркиза, все хорошо. Everything is fine, yes, so there will be no private life at all soon. We will be scanning faces when leaving the house, when entering in the store, wherever you want, some device will smile at you and say, come on. I recently read a science fiction story that depicts the future of this kind of industrial world. And there, a man got sick, he wasn't feeling well, his shop supervisor called him, not some Superman, just the shop supervisor, and told him, go, there's a device over there, get yourself checked. And what does this device do? It measures your vital signs, and if they're far outside the norm and your chances of recovery are a bit lower than standard, less than 100%, then a special team comes and harvests that person's organs. Well, so that's how things are for us, apparently. Something like this is waiting for us in the foreseeable future. Of course, let's hope not, but I have a feeling that everything is heading in that direction. And finally, let's be entertained by these powerful leaders who are already talking complete nonsense. Things like, for example, here telling us about a rebellion, or let's show this one. Timochka. His name is something like Timochka, huh? He recently talked about how those who speak about duty to the motherland should do military service themselves, and their children should serve too. And then it turned out that Timochka's own children are either in Belgium or Austria. Well,
and there was a group of people, as I know, who coordinated, who united, who brought people together, warned and informed.
yes, that's what's interesting. In just a few hours, they almost created an organized crime group out of these people who got together. It's not that easy to organize such a crowd. People see violence and come to help. Yes, someone texted their friends, but claiming there was an organizer. What are you talking about? That's nonsense. Well, at least they could have looked at what was happening. In such an emergency situation, they immediately found some organizer and made him public enemy number one. Come on, for goodness sake, you might as well say that Putin probably paid for it. Soon they'll find Putin's business card there, and it'll all be blamed on that same Sipso outfit.
No stories like that have ever existed. Everyone knew what was going to happen, what to do, and where to go.
Did they prepare before? When did the recruitment officers start beating up civilians? So, according to this Timochka, people knew what to do and everyone was basically packed and ready, waiting to see where to run. What kind of nonsense is that? Well, listen, you have to prepare for all of this. If you're going to talk nonsense, at least mix in some truth with half-truths, not just something like that.
On the topic of who was being trained as an instructor, I would think if we had seen clear communication, yes, brothers, and so on.
And they kept on grinning. What is that, damn it? As they also say some Ukrainians will write it out just like Pilipko. Unfortunately,
The scariest thing, in wartime conditions still, I believe that the law should be stricter. It should be enforced more strictly and clearly, and the punishment for breaking the law should be according to wartime conditions.
yes, shooting everyone is clear. I think they'll get to that soon. They all talk about martial law, and under martial law, a rebellion almost always means execution. But soon they'll start shooting civilians in Ukraine. For some reason, I have no doubt anymore. And they'll say it's democratic because it gives the military a choice. I really think that's exactly how it will be. Well, and that's it. That's all. Goodbye, everyone.